Folks, let's come into session, please. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider a resolution that would reappoint Sopak McCarthy Mulholland, otherwise known as Soapy, and a former member of this board, to represent the Central Valley Water Board on the Pacific Forest and Watershed Land Stewardship Council. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. After a presentation by Soapy Mulholland, interested persons will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. A timer will be used. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No.
None. Yeah. Good cookies, right? We will now begin with a presentation by Soapy. Oh, the mic on, please.
There we go. Sorry. Should I start over again? It probably doesn't matter. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and the best news of all is that Heidi Krolak, the Executive Director for the Stewardship Council, is here, and she did all the heavy lifting for me on this presentation. So I'll go over some of the basics. Carl's going to fall asleep listening to this for the 15th time, but it'll just be a little refresher, and then Heidi's going to give an actual update on the programs as to where we stand now and where we're headed. So let me figure out, I'm not sure how to start this. Thank you. Oh, right here. I was looking up there, trying to read up there. That doesn't make much sense. Maybe stewardship?
That's the one, right?
Perfect. Wait a minute. Next. Okay. Thank you. So the Stewardship Council mission, as I say, this is going to be really repetitive for some of you, but it's a really important thing that was established. It was to take PG&E watershed lands as a result of bankruptcy and to invest in programs that would save 140,000 acres of land and also set up programs that would allow disadvantaged children to spend time in the environment. So as I said, there's 140,000 acres of watershed lands that are located primarily in the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Mountain Range, and we want to conserve these lands. We put conservation easements on them, on all of them. Some of them will be retained by PG&E, and the details of that Heidi's going to go into. This has been the expenditure of $70 million for the CPUC, which they delegated to us to be able to do this work. So it's been an interesting ride, but one of the things when I very first started, there really wasn't anybody on the board who knew what a conservation easement was. And so, as you'll see in the next slide, we have 17 board members, and it was very interesting because people were very they understood, utility easements and easements of that sort, but really had to come up with what were we going to do going forward to make any of this possible. So I was lucky enough to have you put me on the board, and as most of you know, I've run a land trust for quite some time, and we did a template easement, and that's been used with most of our negotiations. We also have awarded money to enhancement projects that make recreation and access in the 140,000 acres available to everybody. So, as I said, it's a very diverse board. As you can see, there's 17 different entities. There are agencies, water groups, nonprofits, you name it. And one of the very interesting requirements is that we make all decisions by consensus. And I'd really never worked with a consensus board, let alone a board of 17 from such diverse interests, all having to take off their interested hats and put on the board hat for the Stewardship Council and come up with some decisions. The board meets 6 times a year, and then there are committee meetings that meet at varying times going forward. That is the background on why we're here and what we're doing. And I'm going to let Heidi tell you about the actual progress, and I'm available for questions or comments when she's done.
Great. Thank you, Sophie. Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Heidi Krolik. I'm the Executive Director of the Stewardship Council. I'm pleased to be able to provide you with an update today on the important work of the Council. And before I get into the update, I just want to take a moment to really acknowledge Sophie and her commitment and energy, her thought to the Stewardship Council board in really advancing our mission and our progress. Sophie has been a member of the board since 2007 and has been chair of our Watershed Planning Committee since 2009. And the Watershed Planning Committee is one of the most active committees on the board, meets every 6 weeks, has a number of subcommittees, and Sophie has chaired that for 11 years now, so it's been quite some time. Sophie brings with her a tremendous amount of expertise on the board, and in particular land management, conservation easements, and land trusts. Her expertise has just been absolutely invaluable. She also sits on the Board Development Committee, which is the committee responsible for strategic planning, organizational development, and board development. So she plays an absolutely instrumental role on the board, and I appreciate your consideration of her reappointment today, especially as we look to the next few years when our mission will be complete and our work will wind down. Continuity on our board is ever more important. So as Sophie mentioned, I'll hit on a couple things just in terms of a little bit of further background, and then I want to get into some exciting updates from our program. So in the settlement agreement, PG&E agreed to conserve 140,000 acres, as Sophie said, of watershed properties. So these lands, PG&E properties, extend from Shasta County up in the north down to Kern County in the south, stretching westward into the Eel River watershed, encompassing Lake and Mendocino counties. And for planning purposes, the Stewardship Council divvied these up into 47, what we refer to as planning units. All told, we're anticipating 98 distinct land transactions. So by transaction, that means land that's going to be retained in ownership by PG&E with a protective conservation easement, or land that's going to be donated from PG&E to another entity with a protective conservation easement. So almost 100 transactions all told. So let's take a look at some of these lands that we're working to protect. I don't know if you're anything like me, but often we do a lot of our work, at committee meetings and board meetings away from the watershed properties. And I think when we get an opportunity to set foot on these lands that we're working so hard to conserve, it makes everything really get crystallized. So this particular photo is of the North Fork Mccollumy River Planning Unit. This is a donation that just recently happened to CAL FIRE, the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. It's really important for us. It's the first donation to a state entity, which again just closed last year. CAL FIRE in this instance is the future fee owner, the current fee owner, and Motherlode Land Trust is the holder of the protective conservation easement. So this particular property is just over 1,000 acres, very important forest land with Tiger Creek and Panther Creek. And these lands will be now incorporated into CAL FIRE's demonstration state forest system, which will provide opportunities for research and demonstration projects on forest management while continuing to provide public recreation opportunities, enhancement opportunities for fish and wildlife habitat, and watershed protection. This photo here is of Humbug Valley, or Tasmamkoyom, which is in the upper part of the Feather River watershed. Mccollumy is the Maidu name for this particular valley, about 2,300 acres that was just transferred this fall to the Maidu Summit Consortium, which I'll talk a little bit about. But the Maidu Summit Consortium is a consortium of 9 Native organizations that have come together really in response to our program and have been working in earnest for almost a decade to reacquire this really important land in their ancestral homeland.
That's a beautiful picture. In fact, it looks like a painting.
Doesn't it? Yeah, it's stunning. This was actually taken this fall when we were up there for a closing celebration. This is Yellow Creek, which is an important Department of Fish and Wildlife wild trout fishery. Really important recreational area and very significant biological and cultural significance. And these lands are now back in the hands of the Maidu, which is really, really exciting, very special. It's also a really interesting project because a team of organizations work together. The local land trust in the area, the Feather River Land Trust, is the main conservation easement holder with the Department of Fish and Wildlife co-holding the conservation easement, and it's this really interesting blend of how Western science and traditional ecological knowledge can come together for the benefit of all of these really special resources. Here is a photo in the Yuba Bear watershed up at Sterling Lake, so along the I-80 corridor up toward Truckee. These lands include several lakes. This property will actually be retained in ownership by PG&E with the Bear Yuba Land Trust holding the conservation easement. You see some recreationists out there on the lake. And then this particular property is up in Shasta County. This is MacArthur Swamp. Really, really important stopover for migratory waterfowl. The total property is about 7,500 acres, a large portion of which were donated to the local Fall River Resource Conservation District. Ducks Unlimited in this case is the conservation easement holder, and it's a really significant area, again, for waterfowl and also for grazing. And all of the white things you see in this picture are birds, and there's a person standing out there in the valley. So just real briefly, so how did we do what we're doing in terms of developing a process? Nothing at this scale had ever been done before in terms of a land conservation effort. And so we spent a number of years planning, and then in about 2008 really began in earnest with a large outreach effort to continue to consider those organizations who registered interest on our interested donee registry, to vet them, and to begin to make recommendations to our board in terms of organizations that are best suited to either own land in fee title or hold conservation easements. The process then moves through, the negotiations happen on all of the transaction documents. You can imagine it can be a cumbersome process. These transaction negotiations in some cases have taken years, transferring land to the state. The Forest Service and other entities, has taken some time, and there's been some significant hurdles that we're overcoming. The transactions then culminate in what we call a land conservation and conveyance plan, and that plan is the vehicle by which the Stewardship Council Board takes an action that this plan, all of the elements are consistent with the requirements of the settlement and stipulation agreement. After a public comment process, the board would then approve the plan. PG&E, then that sort of acts as the Stewardship Council Board's recommendation to PG&E. PG&E then takes that transaction through their process. In some instances, FERC approvals are necessary where operational lands are concerned, and the Public Utilities Commission, California Public Utilities Commission, approves all of the transactions before they're ready to close, and then they enter into a closing process. So we're going to do that 98 times. At the end of the day, we're anticipating making the final slate of recommendations to our board for land conservation and conveyance plans by the end of this year, which is very exciting. And at this point, we're looking at winding down operations, and by the end of 2021 into 2022, there are likely to be a few transactions that are still needing to close escrow, with the board really winding down and our mission completion likely mid-2022 or the end of 2022 at this point. So who are we transferring land to? We have 14 different organizations that have been recommended to be fee title holders. You see here on the slide, we've got federal entities, so the Forest Service, state entities with state parks and CAL FIRE. We've got UC, University of California, the Center for Forestry. A lot of local organizations, so resource conservation districts, community service districts, 2 counties, and also a local Office of Education. And we have 3 tribal entities that we're transferring land to. 2 federally recognized tribes, the Pitt River Tribe and the Potter Valley Tribe, and then the Maidu Summit Consortium and Conservancy, as I mentioned, is the nonprofit. Our conservation easement holders, we're working with 13 conservation easement holders throughout the state. Most of these are local land trusts, so these lands are within their service territory, they're in their backyard. We are working with a couple of statewide or national organizations. Ducks Unlimited is one example. Also, Department of Fish and Wildlife, as I mentioned previously, is co-holding one of the conservation easements. And then we have the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, who is a holder of covenants. And the covenants are similar to a conservation easement, but different, and those are for the lands that are being granted to the U.S. Forest Service. So SNC will be the covenant holder. So 80 plans have been approved to date by the board. As I mentioned, we're wrapping up the final 18 that the board should approve this year. We still have a number of transactions still to close. So 50 transactions to date have closed escrow. The property's changed hands, the conservation easement's been recorded. We're working fast and furious to continue to move these transactions through the process. And we are hopeful that, again, the last set of transactions will close and the Stewardship Council will meet its mission and dissolve the organization in 2022 is our current date. Wanted to hit on just a couple things in terms of tribal.
May I ask a question?
Please.
So, you're going to be dissolved in 2022. Your primary purpose then is to really put this thing into motion, and you've done that to a large part, and is to consolidate it with other lands that are donated. Is that correct?
Well, we're just focused on the PG&E retained watershed lands, right?
Okay.
So once the lands are transferred and the conservation easements are recorded, and our requirements under the settlement and stipulation have been met, then our work is complete, and our organization will dissolve.
These lands you say that are gifts, are they part of the PG&E lands?
They're part of PG&E's holdings, right,
Okay.
that are being transferred. And this is part of PG&E's requirements under their first bankruptcy.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
So after 2022, then there's no need for an organization to provide oversight, is that correct?
That's correct, right. And I'll mention it now since the time is right. So we actually have a dual mission. We have a land conservation mission, as Sophie mentioned, and a youth mission. The youth mission is really to focus on getting underserved youth connected with the outdoors. There was interest early on in that portion of our mission continuing. So our youth program was operated in-house, and in 2013, we actually transferred the youth operations to an external entity, which was the Foundation for Youth Investment, became actually what's now known as Youth Outside, which is a flourishing organization based in Oakland, who is really taking that mission and moving beyond just the Stewardship Council work, just the PG&E properties. So that portion of the mission will exist into perpetuity, is the hope. And our work on the land program, those properties will continue to be conserved through those conservation easements, regardless of who the future landowner is.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, good questions. So with respect to tribal engagement, I wanted to just, mention here a really important element of our work is our work engaging Native American communities. It's something that the Stewardship Council Board has taken very seriously with 3 entities that have been recommended for fee ownership. Over 8,000 acres will transfer in fee title to one of 3 entities, the Pitt River Tribe, Potter Valley Tribe, or the Maidu Summit Consortium. And in addition, we've been working really hard with partner organizations and those entities where we've made recommendations for fee transfer and conservation easements to try to work to see if there might be opportunities for MOUs, engagement opportunities to partner on these properties for cooperative management and for resource protection. And there's been a couple of exciting examples of that. We also have a number of examples of enhancement projects where we're funding grants to get work done on the land, where Native American communities have been involved in that work, which I'll hit on in just a moment through our enhancement program. And this photo is the same. It's Humbug Valley, which I showed in a prior image of, previously it was Yellow Creek. And this is a picture of the celebration that occurred this fall with the transfer of this particular property. And it was really a significant symbolic moment of, the transfer from PG&E to the Maidu Summit Consortium, and then the transfer of the land from the Maidu elders to the Maidu youth. And it was just it was a beautiful celebration and a gorgeous day, and you can't beat the backdrop. It's really a stunning property. So with respect to our enhancement program, I'll just hit on this briefly. We anticipate at this point $13 million being awarded or budgeted for projects to focus on things like habitat restoration, recreational improvements, cultural resource protection. We had a robust outreach effort back in 2017. We anticipate some additional funds being available, and just actually currently we're out with another solicitation for grant awards that we're hopefully going to be having the board consider by the end of this year, which is really, really exciting. So, but again, this is a balance as we work toward dissolution to ensure that we've got appropriate funds for all of the requirements under the settlement and stipulation agreement, our operational costs, and then also ensuring we maximize those funds getting out onto the land. Here's one particular property project that we're really proud of up at Hat Creek. So I know many of you know or been to Hat Creek, located between Bernie and Fall River Mills off of Highway 299 up in Shasta County. Hat Creek's a rare spring-fed creek, which is a tributary to the Pitt River that rises from the eastern slopes of Lassen Peak and Lassen National Park. This project involved the restoration of a portion of Hat Creek as habitat for trout and other fish and wildlife. It included native plantings and included a lot of robust recreational improvements. You can see in this photo, there's actually, those were some of the habitat improvements that were taking place, but there's actually a brand new bridge that's been built to facilitate public access. This project involved cow trout and a partnership with the Pitt River Tribe through an organization called Lomacotsi Restoration Project. This is one of our larger grants at $1.4 million, and I think was really supported well by the Stewardship Council board, and that CalTrout was able to leverage $1 million and other sources of funding for this particular project. So here you can see the new trail on the left side with the new fencing, new parking lot area, interpretive signage, and some new gates to help to facilitate and control some public access. Sky Mountain Camp is another property that we're really, really excited about. This is our largest enhancement grant to date to the San Joaquin County Office of Education for $5 million. This project is part of the Lake Spalding Planning Unit. So again, up the I-80 corridor on the way to Truckee. PG&E has an extraordinary youth camp that's been located on their property for a number of years. It's been a labor of love that's been enhanced over time. It's right kind of on that snow border, so they do get some significant snowfall during the year. And it is going to continue as a youth camp and be expanded, which is really, really exciting. So you can see some photos up there of the kind of the scenery and the facilities themselves. The idea here is that the San Joaquin County Office of Education, they successfully run camps up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, bringing kids from the Central Valley to Santa Cruz Mountains. This opportunity is really going to expand the types of terrain and the ecosystems that their campers are going to be exposed to. So this is an overnight camp opportunity that's going to provide a really great new learning experience for students about the Sierra Nevada mountains and sometimes in the snow. You can see the kids playing on the upper right-hand side on a inflatable object there in the middle of the lake, which looks like a lot of fun. So really an exciting opportunity, especially for some kids who haven't left the county or who have never had an opportunity to see or experience snow. And then wanted to mention with our youth program, talked a little bit about this with Youth Outside, but this is a $30 million investment. So again, land program was $70 million. Youth program is a $30 million investment to get underserved youth connected with the outside. I mentioned that Youth Outside is the organization now leading this effort, doing really great work out of Oakland, and really focused on, getting youth outside, but also really focused on this next generation of diverse outdoor conservation leaders. And in-house, we've retained a portion of the youth money. One project that program that have been really excited about is for a few years now, we've funded a youth internship program with a portion of the remaining youth investment program funds. We've partnered with the California Council of Land Trusts to place interns in land trusts to give these interns an opportunity to learn about how a land trust operates and what they do. It also provides an invaluable resource for the land trusts themselves. And this program is having lasting benefits for these young conservation professionals. Soapy had an intern at her land trust, and I know had a phenomenal experience. And there was an extra intern this year, and we got to house an intern for the summer at the Stewardship Council office, which was it was phenomenal and a great way to get kind of a closer glimpse on how the program's working.
Can I tell them the brief story really quickly?
Absolutely.
This is how you made such a difference. So we had 2 interns this summer through CCLT and the Stewardship Council, and one of them has been working as a volunteer with us through the years. And her family, her father is a farm worker and never graduated from the 4th grade. Her mother is a stay-home mom with 6 kids and never graduated from high school. And she started working with us, and because of this program, this summer made the decision that she wanted to do something to work in conservation. We got her a full scholarship to Humboldt, and they're paying for everything, and she's there. And it just makes me cry because she was so excited, and to say what a difference it's made. I mean, it's going to change her whole family's life, not to mention hers. But her mom did not approve of her going, so she said she could take a bus up there. So my whole board got together and bought her a computer. Little things, like her mom said she could take the sheets off her 3-year-old little brother's bed. We bought her sheets and everything, and she's come back and said, this is the best experience of her whole life. It makes me cry every time she walks in the office, and I think how these little, it's one thing to say you do that, but you just don't know how you're changing people's lives in a really positive way. Excuse me for taking time.
Thank you, Soapy. Well, appreciate that. And this slide is a little bit challenging to see. I apologize for that, but wanted to just provide with a financial breakdown as well, which seems that's a hard thing to follow, Soapy. But the numbers are important as well, and these are ratepayer funds. $70 million was the original investment. One thing I just wanted to highlight here is that in terms of enhancement money, so those dollars that are going to actually physically enhancing the properties, as well as land, that all of this property will be encumbered by a conservation easement. One of our really significant investments is providing endowments to these local land trusts to do this ongoing monitoring work in perpetuity to ensure that these lands are being managed consistent with their conservation purposes. So that both the physical enhancements and those endowment enhancements together are about $30 million. So that proves to be a really significant chunk of the total. And then I'll end with a slide here of one of the more recent transaction closings. This is in the Kings River area in Fresno County, property that PG&E will continue to retain ownership of, and the conservation easement is held by the Sequoia Riverlands Trust, which is the land trust that Soapy was formerly the executive director of. Beautiful property. I love the blooming flowers. So that's what we have for you today. I just want to really thank you for the opportunity for us to come and provide you with an update, and thank you, because I hope that these acknowledgments and accomplishments that we're sharing, they're your accomplishments as well as a part of the Stewardship Council board, and I just really appreciate your continued support of Soapy as a member of our board. She's just been an absolutely invaluable human being to have as part of this effort. So thank you all, and we're open to questions or comments.
Yeah, no, and I worked with Soapy before when she was on the board. I think, from the board's perspective, particularly for the board members that are relatively new here, I think through Soapy, this board can take a pride of ownership in a lot of the successes of this program. I mean, it's it's through a lot of leadership by SOPI. There's also state board members, if I recall. I think Dee Dee is one of the representatives on it. Wade Crowfoot, I think, is another representative on it. So the board of directors and has done some wonderful things with the programs and the resources that it has available to it. And again, this board acts through SOPI in her capacity here, and I think that a lot of the success of this program is due to her leadership. So when it came time to figure out how we were going to renew this, I know it was a prior decision, a decision that I'm more than happy to continue to make a recommendation that SOPI stay with this program through its conclusion in 2022. And so that was my recommendation, putting it in the form of a resolution for you to essentially ratify her continued participation through the close of this program.
I think that's good. It would be, I think, silly to do otherwise. She's taken a solid leadership role here, been very productive, and to have to come back the last year and do it yet again, I think would be a waste of our time. Any questions or comments, members of the board?
Yeah, I would just like to comment that I like the overall program. I remember when Sophie, when you did the presentation a year or so ago, and the results are really outstanding. And my favorite piece is the youth involvement. So when you're done with this program, you have stewards that will continue the work that you're doing. And that's really most impressive, because that's the direction we're headed. We need our youth to be involved. We need them to understand the value of the land, conservation, water quality, and all that's available to them that's at their disposal, but they have no clue about, many of them. So the training that you're doing and educating the youth to appreciate the environment and wanting to be a part of helping to restore it, protect it, it's phenomenal. And one of the projects I've been working with for the past few years has been with the youth, and I think I spoke about it then. So it's a small scale to the big scale that you're doing, but it's still the same vein, trying to carry on and then bring the youth along so they will be able to continue the work that's been going on. So we really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Any further comments?
I just say thank you as well. I didn't have the benefit of seeing this before, so you've enlightened me on another subject I have a lot of interest in, but not a lot of knowledge, so thank you. Great program.
Soapy Mark likes to fish.
I like that Hat Creek slide a lot. Thank you.
Enhancing fishing access for you, yeah.
Very good. Do we have any cards? If there's no cards, then, and I take what your former statement was your recommendation. I won't ask you to repeat it again.
Yeah, well, I will also say, consistent with the resolution, to the extent any MOU or any other document needs to be updated, I consider the resolution authorization to act on behalf of the board to
Certainly.
update such documents accordingly.
Unless I hear objection otherwise, certainly. Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and close the hearing. Unless there's further deliberation by members of the board, we will move to voting. Seeing none, roll call, please. And,
A motion to
I need a
reappoint
motion.
for
Yeah,
Sophie
yeah, give me a motion, please.
McCullough to the Stewardship Council.
And do I have a second?
I'll second.
And that's basically approval of the resolution. So Denise has moved, Mark has seconded. Call the roll, please.
Ms. Cadara?
Yes.
Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Brower?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you, and congratulations, Sophie, on a job well done, and thank you very much for your day-to-day leadership of this program. We'll now move to agenda item 12, update on expert panel review of East San Joaquin Coalition surface water monitoring. This time the board will hear an update on the expert panel's review of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program surface water monitoring for the East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition. This is an information item only and no action will be taken although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. After the staff presentation, interested persons will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
So I have to say that was a really inspirational presentation and kind of a tough one to follow. So bringing up the rear today. Good afternoon, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Susan Fergain, and I'm the Unit Chief for the Monitoring and Implementation Unit in the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Today I'm going to update you on the East San Joaquin Surface Water Monitoring Framework Expert Panel Review. And this effort began about 1 year ago. Throughout my presentation, I'm going to refer to the expert panel as the panel, and I'll refer to the Surface Water Monitoring Framework as the framework. So today I want to cover 4 main areas. First, I want to review the background events that led to the formation of the panel. Then I'll describe the main goals of the panel process. Next, I'll explain how the process is being implemented, including the timeline and the elements that have been completed so far. And I'll wrap up my presentation by telling you how you can access the panel website and all the materials that are on there related to the panel process. During this presentation, it's important to keep in mind that the panel process applies only to the East San Joaquin framework. In this map that shows the Central Valley coalitions, you can see the East San Joaquin area outlined in red. So in December of 2012, the Central Valley Water Board adopted the East San Joaquin Waste Discharge Requirements Order. This order regulates the discharge of waste from the irrigated lands, and it replaced the previous waiver of waste discharge requirements in the Irrigated Lands Program. Then in January of 2013, the order was petitioned to the State Water Resources Control Board by environmental protection interests. The petitioner stated that the framework isn't adequate because it doesn't provide the data that's needed to show water quality goals are being met. And in particular, the petitioners claimed that the representative monitoring strategy is flawed and that the density of monitoring sites isn't enough to show that beneficial uses are being met. So the State Water Board responded to the petitioner's concerns in an order that was issued in 2018. This order mostly focused on the groundwater concerns, but it also directed Central Valley Water Board staff to implement an independent review of the East San Joaquin framework. This order also requires that the review be conducted as an open public process. Therefore, to ensure an independent process and timely implementation, in 2019, staff contracted with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, also referred to as SQUIRP, and this effort is being led by Dr. Steve Weisberg of SQUIRP, and his role in this effort is to facilitate and administer the expert panel review. So the main goal for the panel is to evaluate the East San Joaquin Surface Water Monitoring Framework. This includes reviewing the monitoring design, the parameters, measurement methods, data processing and assessment, decision-making steps, and resulting actions. To ensure that there's ample opportunity for public participation, we plan to hold 3 public meetings this year. Ultimately, this effort will lead to the panel compiling and submitting a recommendations report to the Central Valley Water Board. And based on the panel's recommendations and board guidance, staff may propose changes in the monitoring program. So we've made substantial progress in implementing the panel review process. Selection and recruiting of panel members is complete. The panel charge questions have been finalized, and 1 3-day public panel meeting has already taken place. Next, I'll talk about each of these elements in more detail. So before starting the panel selection process, SCORP formed a stakeholder advisory group. The purpose of this group is to support transparency and provide representation during the process. The advisory group consists of 9 members, 3 each from environmental interests, agricultural permittees, and the water boards. The advisory group has provided important input to SCORP in the selection of panel members, refining panel charge questions, and in creating the first panel meeting agenda. They also serve as liaisons to other stakeholders in their areas of interest. So the first step in the panel selection process was to decide on what kind of expertise is needed. So with input from the advisory group, SCORP identified 5 major categories of panel expertise. The candidates were then nominated and ranked by the advisory group members in each of the 5 categories. And the top-ranked nominees all agreed to participate on the panel. So the 5 selected panel members and their main areas of expertise are shown here. Mr. John Costantino was selected in the area of regulatory program implementation. Mr. Costantino served on the Central Valley Water Board for 2 terms, and he's a founding principal at Tradesman Advisors, Inc. Dr. John Hunt was selected in the area of monitoring program design. He's currently a research toxicologist with UC Davis and director for the Central Coast Water Resources Center. Dr. Doug Parker was selected in the area of agronomy and agricultural practices. And Dr. Parker is currently director of the California Institute of Water Resources with UC Agricultural and Natural Resources Department. Dr. Charles Menzies was selected in the area of aquatic ecotoxicology, and Dr. Menzies is currently executive director for Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry global initiatives. And Dr. Armbrust was selected in the area of environmental chemistry, and he's currently the chair of Environmental Sciences Department at Louisiana State, and was previously the director of the Mississippi State Chemistry Lab. And the panel website contains the full resumes for all the panel members. So the panel's review of the East San Joaquin framework is guided by a set of charge questions that were created to respond to the petitioner's concerns. Beginning with charge questions that were listed in the state board order, SCORP and the advisory group refined and organized the questions to ensure their clarity. This resulted in 4 key questions, as I've summarized here. First question, are the monitoring program questions and the decisions that need to be made clearly linked? Second, is the East San Joaquin monitoring framework scientifically defensible? Third, is there a mutual understanding of how data are going to be used? And fourth, if revised, how can the program maintain compatibility with historic data? So the first public meeting was held on January 7th to 9th of this year, and the main goal of that meeting was to familiarize the panel with the East San Joaquin monitoring program, including its history, design, methods, and results. That was achieved with a day of stakeholder presentations, a field tour day, and a day for internal panel deliberations that ended with a verbal report on their preliminary impressions. Also want to mention that you can view video recordings of the stakeholder presentations and the panel's preliminary impressions also on the project website. So on the first day, a variety of presentations were made by the stakeholders. In addition to important background information, there were presentations on the 2 opposing technical reviews that were prepared for Monterey Coastkeeper and the East San Joaquin Coalition, respectively. A portion of this day was also set aside for stakeholders to present their perspectives on why they think the monitoring program should or should not be changed. On day 2, the panel and other stakeholders toured 6 monitoring sites in the East San Joaquin watershed area. The tour provided an on-the-ground view of the coalition's monitoring strategy and the region's diverse landscapes. At each stop, coalition representatives discussed the site's history and monitoring results. This prompted many questions and discussions from the group, and overall, the field tour gave participants with insight on the opportunities and challenges of implementing the monitoring program. On the last day, the panel met in closed session. They discussed parts of the monitoring program that they believe are in good shape and won't need further review, as well as topics they would like to hear more about. At the end of the day, panel members gave a report on their preliminary impressions and questions. So the panel believes that the monitoring framework's quality assurance procedures, the field and laboratory methods, the data management system, and the pesticide evaluation protocol are technically sound and won't need any further deliberation. They do have 4 main areas that they would like to get further information and presentations in. First, in the area of toxicity test methods, the panel feels that toxicity testing is a really important tool and that the program should possibly consider different species and different test endpoints. Second, the panel is interested in understanding the program's connection with downstream water quality, downstream of the East San Joaquin area, and how those assessment programs such as the Delta Regional Monitoring Program tie in. Third, they would like to get more of an understanding of the hydrology and transport pathways. They feel that in order to do their job right, they need a better understanding of how waterways are connected and what factors influence chemical transport. And finally, the panel asked for at least 4 case studies that illustrate the steps in the management plan process. So this would include all steps starting from the monitoring that triggers exceedances through the development of a management plan, the implementation, and the completion of a management plan. So our next step for this process is to hold another public meeting, which is scheduled for April 28th to 30th of this year, and that will be held here. We anticipate there'll be a day of presentations and discussion that will respond to the panel's requests. And the panel is also expected to verbally present their tentative recommendations during this meeting. The last public meeting is tentatively planned for summer of this year. A draft recommendations report will be compiled and made available ahead of this meeting, and the meeting will focus on receiving stakeholder comments and answering questions. This feedback should lead to additional refinements before the final report is submitted in early 2021. Then one or more of the panel members will present their findings and recommendations during a board meeting in 2021. And this will give the board members the chance to ask questions and discuss the findings and recommendations. Based on the panel's recommendations and regional board guidance, staff will evaluate potential changes in the surface water monitoring program and bring any recommendations to the board for consideration. So as promised, I want to give you a little bit more information about the project website. The project website, as I mentioned, includes pretty much all the materials and information that have been compiled for the meetings so far, including the panel member resumes, the panel charge questions, all meeting-related documents, videos of presentations. There's a field stations slideshow, public comments, and more. And I want to highlight the field station slideshow, which was put together by the coalition for the field tour day. And it shows all of the field sites that were visited, both aerially and close up. and is a really good view of, what we saw in the field that day. And then finally, to close my presentation, I want to show you the website address, or even more simply, you could Google SCORP Expert Panel Review Panel, SCCWRP Expert Review Panel, and it'll come up in the search. And that completes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Questions from board members? You were extremely thorough, Susan.
People tell me that.
Once again, thank you for some great work, very thorough, as usual.
She's also the contract manager for this whole endeavor, for what it's worth, and part of the reason why this has been as successful as it's been. So her thoroughness is greatly appreciated.
Thanks.
So this issue is coming back to the board, I would presume,
Yes.
for the monitoring program?
Yes, so there'll be a presentation by one or more of the panelists, probably a little more, maybe a year or more from now, on their recommendations report. And following that, based on the report and what the guidance is from this board, we would, if it's appropriate, we would look at proposing changes and bringing those to the board for consideration next year.
Next year, okay. In the meantime, the East San Joaquin is working under the monitoring program that we originally laid out.
Yes.
And have they incorporated any of these changes into their monitoring program?
No, so this is just the very beginning of this process,
Okay.
and these were just initial thoughts by the
Okay.
panel. They haven't even made any particular recommendations yet. But yeah, the East San Joaquin is still doing all of the work under the current monitoring framework, which is actually a very thorough program.
Not wanting to drag this out, but could you explain a little bit more on the toxicity endpoints you're talking about?
Sure, yeah. We have 4 different test species that are required in our program, and there's at least one, Cereodaphnia dubia, that we're only doing the acute mortality test endpoint. We're only requiring that, and it's fairly common to use a reproductive test endpoint, and this has been brought up a few times over the years as to whether it would be appropriate to include that in our program. So that was one of the things that they're thinking might be a recommendation.
And when this was petitioned to the state board, was that one of the issues?
I don't think
I don't
the
think so.
petition got
Yeah.
into that specific of details. I mean, they're concerned about the impacts of discharges on aquatic resources. And the stakeholders that are present in this process do have an interest in the toxicity test methods, but it wasn't in the petition itself, I don't think.
Okay, and if you get a positive hit, are there provisions in the monitoring? I should know, but I don't, for follow-up?
So for the toxicity tests
Yes.
in particular, so like the other parameters that we require in the program, once there's been 2 exceedances or hits within a 3-year period, then it moves into a management plan, which has requirements that need to be developed, and it needs to implement practices that will address those issues. I would say even before we get to a second hit, the coalition does outreach with their growers and says, look, we've got this issue. It looks like maybe it points to this or that, if they have that information. And they work with the growers to say, let's not see this turn into a management plan. Let's get ahead of it.
And if I'm not mistaken, East San Joaquin has done management plans in the past.
They have done many, many management plans, and they have many that are current and many that have been approved for completion due to the issues
Right.
being cleared up.
Okay. Well, good work. And
Thank you.
this is sort of the template, if you will, for the others. Is this correct?
Well, I think that remains to be seen.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why when we went out on a field tour, we attracted a lot of attention from folks from other coalitions, from people who were completely outside of our region. Because even though this really is a focused discussion based on whether the East San Joaquin's representative monitoring program was sufficient to protect beneficial uses in surface water or not, everybody kind of has the idea that when you get a panel of experts together and when they look in depth at a particular program and then produce a white paper, that could spread to other programs, that could spread to other regions. And I think the petition order indicates that the state board will also receive a copy and they'll think about what they want to do with it. But specifically, the white paper is to be delivered to the Central Valley Water Board and to be used in decision-making with respect to just the East San Joaquin's representative monitoring program, and that's it. Anything else is kind of like, does the white paper have applicability outside of the East San Joaquin? And that totally remains to be seen.
Well, it adds to a background of information that may be useful when you're doing a scientific evaluation.
Absolutely.
Good. Any further questions or comments? Once again, thank you very much. Folks, we're going to take a 10-minute break because I have to get ready for the next item. It's called strategic planning. And
So-
you know, you got to really rub your hands together and get all
My
excited here.
So do we have any comments on East San Joaquin real quick? We don't have any cards.
I think I made the comments.
My suggestion would actually be for the strategic planning, as we've done in the past, to take comments from interested persons before we begin the exercise with the board members.
Okay, you're referring now to strategic planning, of course.
Yes.
And we're going to take a short break.
Yeah. So, and we do need to set up the tables because the four
Okay, good.
board members will be sitting down here.
Good. Thank you.
side? For karaoke?
Okay.
Feel like I'm holding things up. I was telling stories too. Okay, this time the board will continue discussion on long-term strategic planning. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Item will begin with comments from interested persons. Each one will have 3 minutes to address the board on strategic planning. And after comments by interested persons, the executive officer will provide a brief presentation to the board, followed by board discussion. I understand we have some interested persons here.
Do we? I don't know if we have any interested in commenting. All right.
Debbie was here. I thought she
De-
was.
I thought Debbie was here to comment on it too, but all right. So she
so that anyone who is watching can hear.
Are there any? Are there any interested persons?
I think not. I do want to first introduce you to a couple members of the Strategic Planning Committee who will be doing some of the legwork here in putting the document together. We have Maxine and Chris, if you want to introduce yourselves. I know Mark and Carl, they were two who were on the phone during the discussion on January 2nd. Just to real quick, we ran through as a committee, according to the board's direction in December, we ran through the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats here at that session. And so we got a lot of good feedback from folks from various aspects of the office, from the admin folks. There's people in Fresno, people in Reading, and Maxine and Chris are two of the staff here in the Rancho Cordova office who are working on the strategic planning committee. So we did that. Today will be the chance for the board to run through that exercise, but before that, by all means, if you want to introduce yourselves to the board.
Hi, just briefly, Maxine Cottrell. I'm in the non-15 permitting department here, water resource control engineer.
And Chris Flower, I am in the underground storage tanks group, and I'm a senior engineering geologist here.
And Clint Snyder is also on the Strategic Planning Committee as one of the executive positions on there.
Is there a problem here? We've got two geologists.
There's a few other engineers on there, but and we've got the voice of reason. We actually have somebody from the admin unit also participating. So. Real briefly, and I think today's session should be not too long, but I do want to kind of recap where we have been, where we are currently going, and to get a little bit of input from the four of you. We've actually heard a bit from Mark and Carl during the January 2nd component, but to get a little more input from especially Denise and Raji here today. And just to look at the table of contents on page 4, or page 2 of the session 4, this is really broken up. The strategic planning effort will be broken up into 5 phases. Really, a 6th phase is the implementation phase. So phase 1 is the commitment to strategic planning. That component we satisfied at the August board meeting, where the board said, this is worth it. We will allocate some staff time, including Chris, Maxine, and the rest of the strategic planning committee's time to work through the strategic planning process and use time here at the board meeting to do that as well. Phase 2, up in Reading, we had a discussion of mission, vision, and values. You can see all 3 of them are articulated in the document itself on pages 1 and 2, and those will actually be going up on the board's website in the months to come. And welcome Christine. introduce you as the voice of reason, cutting through all the engineers and geologists that we have on the Strategic Planning Committee. She is here, works a variety in a leadership role here in the administrative unit that kind of keeps the lights on and stuff moving in the right direction, and the contracts working and the training working and things like that. So very valuable member of the team. Phase 2 we completed in October. Mission, vision, and values will be going up on the website should be going up tomorrow. Phase 3 is actually the meat of the strategic planning process, and that really is the assessment. Where are we? What are our programs? What is the stakeholder impression of us? What was the board's history, and how did we get here? So the big component of that, in terms of what the Strategic Planning Committee and the board will be engaged in, is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, basically to get our gut check assessment of where we are as an organization, what we need to work on, and what we should be concentrating on as opportunities in the future. The assessment also includes, and one of the things that the Strategic Planning Committee will be working on in the next couple months, going to all the board's 19 programs and really kind of tracing what their history is, getting a little brief timeline of, okay, so when, say like the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, when was it founded? What came into being? When did it majorly get staffed up? When was the point at which the waivers turned into WDRs and the WDRs turned into something that looked at both surface water and groundwater? And we're going to do that exercise for each of the 19 program areas and see if we can present that to you at a later board meeting. So we got the history. We've got the history of the programs. We're doing the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We did part of it in January, doing some of it here. And then comes the outreach component. And that is when the Strategic Planning Committee, and this will happen later on over the summer after we kind of strategize about what the plan will look like, will engage in one manner or another with a bunch of the communities that are affected by the board's action. So that includes dischargers, it includes environmental justice communities, it includes tribal groups. And so we will be talking a little bit here today about how the board would like that to be conducted. I've got some opinions, but we'll basically be a little bit of a brainstorming session here today about what you want to see the Strategic Planning Committee do. And that outreach will culminate in a forum at the August board meeting, where we will invite additional opinions and of what the board's doing well, what it's not doing well, things like that. And then we get to the final decision-making point, phase 4, where the board in early fall will be engaged on, okay, so we have all this information, we have an assessment of where we are, what are the priorities, what are the priority areas that will be discussed in the strategic plan as kind of the guidepost for the next 5-6 years of the board's efforts that we can focus on. And then phase 5 is kind of the nose to the grindstone. Let's write the plan and let's get it approved by the board by the end of 2020. So that's in a nutshell what the recap is, where we've been as a strategic planning organization, and what we're going to be doing next. And so again, with that, I would kind of invite anybody's comments on the calendar, what it looks like. We did explore briefly kind of getting funding for facilitation, and because of the timeline here, we probably couldn't get it done quickly enough. State contracting takes a little while, and we didn't necessarily have the resources available to do it. So we're still doing it on a shoestring, and thanks to the efforts of the Strategic Planning Committee, that's where some of the work is going to be being done. So any comments?
You go.
Green, but oh, there it's not working. Yeah, I just revisiting when Carl and I sat on this SWOT exercise, so I don't want to talk too much about that. We'll let Raji and Denise pitch in on that one. I'm kind of curious from your guys' perspective how the process is going, with the committee, the staff, because we only see it every 2 months at most, and then on a phone call I don't really have a sense for how this is being developed with the staff, how it's being received, how much input you're getting, that kind of thing.
For starters, it's at the onset. So most of the work was just that January meeting. I think the homework assignments are going to start coming pretty quick over the next few months. But feel free to kind of tell the board what your kind of initial impressions were.
Yeah, I would echo what Patrick said. We're still in the early throes. I think we're going to meet next week and kind of talk about the plan for the next meeting. So we're still really early in the phases of this. But I think it was interesting just to kind of see the diversity of the group and the different responses everybody had when it came to doing the internal SWOT exercise, just to see where the different mindsets were. So it was good to get that information, and it was definitely something we could appreciate.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Yeah.
And I agree with Patrick as well. I think coming from admin, it's nice to feel like we have a voice too, and we can express where we're having some issues. So that's nice, and it's a good opportunity for us to be able to express our needs.
Not only a voice, but a very critical voice. So as I understand it, you're going to be working more with staff. Is that correct? More outreach with staff? Is that part of?
External.
Oh, external is
Yeah,
next.
yeah. So again, I think there's going to be 2 exercises that we're going to do, and
Then after the final external, then do we come back and talk more generally with staff about where we are?
we can. It's at your election. I think at a certain extent, this group here was formed to kind of be the staff perspective on the strategic planning. There's a separate effort ongoing. We should get results back, I think, mid-March, Cal EPA wide about engagement. And so
Okay.
because we didn't want to duplicate some of the efforts that were underway in that project, and just to kind of focus this a little more narrowly on the board and its strategic plan.
I think it might be useful before we wrap this up and say this is our final,
Yeah,
is that there be a discussion with staff,
certainly.
maybe in this room so you can bring in the other offices
Yeah.
and give them a document that shows what it's going to look like and see if there's comments.
Yeah, and we can certainly, we can certainly do that. And I was about to say the next step is the strategic planning committee, is developing part of the history. We'll be going to the program managers and potentially going to long-term staff to kind of ask them, interview them, tell us a little bit about the program, how it's developed, and where we're at right now with all 19 of them. So from admin to irrigated lands to mines, even if they're not represented on the strategic planning committee itself, that's one of the next steps that we're going to be doing. So we can present it to the board and say, look, you get a snapshot of the individual programs' priorities, of the metrics each year in August and in December. But where have we been? Where did this program really take off? Where did it find its roots, and what is it doing now that's different than it did back then? So that's what we'll be talking about at next week's meeting. And then whatever the results of the brainstorming effort, and I think Carl's kicking it off a little early there, in terms of outreach and engagement with potentially staff and with the outside community as well, that's what the strategic planning committee will be working on as over the summer, and then writing the plan up in the fall and into the winter.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking for is some last minute input by staff.
Oh yeah.
After this, because we're a team, and I'd like everybody to have the opportunity to come back and talk to you after this thing is put together. So if there's some little twists and turns we have to make it correct.
Sure thing. We can do that.
So would you be suggesting a review period or specified time for review and then adjustments if that needs to be done?
Yeah, and it could be done basically through a presentation, where they're going to present during a certain period of time one day in this room, and it would be in the other offices also.
We could do that as part of potentially the August all staff or
Okay,
September all staff.
that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. And I'll actually leave the review of kind of what the attachment was, and that was the exercise that we went through in January, and really just get into the meat of it, hearing from Denise and Raji about, and I think Mark and Carl too, because I left your responses off of the summary responses so that you could reiterate or change your mind if you wanted to as part of the board. So first, I think one of the things that we had the members of the Strategic Planning Committee do is introduce themselves and by saying what brought them to the board. And I think that the folks here around the table may know individually one or two of the board members what brought them to the board, but feel free to tell the other board members, what motivated you at first to become a volunteer member that devoted so much of your time to this effort that is often thankless, but does have a very meaningful impact on water quality. And then to say, number two, what one of your frustrations is working here at the board. And that's kind of, just for what it's worth, a lot of the meetings that I facilitate even among our executive management team, I do like to start off as the icebreaker, not just the good stuff, but also something that's trickier too, kind of the rose and the thorn approach to get the meetings. Starting off by saying something potentially, controversial or something tough that you're wrestling with, so that it's not, because otherwise the meetings, everybody's just nodding their head and saying yes, 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 and then the last 5 minutes you're like, oh, and by the way, this thing is bugging me. So to get the meeting started off that way. So I invite you to do that, and then we can get into saying what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I imagine that this whole exercise probably be 45 minutes or so. Shouldn't be too time consuming here, but by all means, I'll start off going around the table to Denise.
Well, I didn't really want to be on the board. I was, I'm keeping it real. Somebody asked me and I just said, no, I don't think that's, more my husband, he's an engineer that can handle all this stuff. But when I decided that I was going to pursue it, I realized that there was an opportunity for my community, the disadvantaged community, for the constituents that I have been working feverishly to assist in the Central Valley. And then I said, well, I've been working on this water issue for the Central Valley, and it kind of fits with what they're asking me to do. And then I asked the question, is this, what kind of committee is this? And say, well, you work for city councils and stuff. It's like being a planning commission on steroids. It's like, well, but again, as I heard it, instead of running away from it, which I wanted to do, I saw, again, an opportunity to have a voice for the people that I was representing. And so that's what led me to get on this board. And I'm glad to be here, and I think it's been an enlightening experience, an invaluable experience for me, for the community that I serve, and the constituents I serve throughout the Central Valley. Frustration, I think I've said it enough times in concerns about the community engagement and how the disadvantaged community is represented. I've expressed the frustration over the past 4 or 5 years, but I've seen the change in that happening in a positive way. So I brought the frustration in, but I've seen staff work with the concerns and bring about a positive change. And just a discussion today about CV salts and where we are with that. Those are all improvements, and I think we're headed in the right direction in that regard.
Well, I did want to be here. No, just kidding. Well, I was previously a city council member and I served on the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control Board. So, and my background's in chem and bio, and I've worked in labs before, and I really enjoyed being on the air board. I don't know if folks would say that, but I did. And I was asked by folks to serve on this water board, and I thought it was a perfect fit because it went along with everything my background was in. And same thing as you, I enjoy serving my communities, and I know in Kern and Arvin and the outlying areas, there was a feeling that there wasn't a lot of representation on the water board, and there's a lot of different concerns. And they wanted a voice and someone who could, I guess, explain what Kern County is. Sometimes we get a bad rap. It's not just all oil and ag. But for those reasons, I thought it would be really interesting, and I researched it quite a bit, and I saw everything you guys did, which is a lot. But I like that. I like learning and growing, and that's just who I am. And I enjoy being on this water board. I learned so much. My frustrations, I think, have a lot to do with when people ask me a lot of times when I go back home if there's issues with water as far as like Arvin and EJ communities. And like right now, 2 of my businesses are shut down because yesterday there was a water break in Arvin, and the infrastructure is just really bad in a small community. And because of that, so they're testing the water and making sure you have to, the boil, no boil advisory, all that's happening. And this isn't the first time it's happened. And issues like that in these communities happen constantly. And my frustration is because I feel like I go back and they're like, well, are you going to fix it? And I just look at them kind of like, well, that's not really what we do. And that to me is very frustrating. They're like, well, what do you do? And that's kind of where I think I assumed we'd be doing more when I joined the board. I didn't understand that, how that, well, that's not us. That's this Department of Water. And then it's this state board, and that's not you. So that to me is frustrating because I think you should be able to work. I mean, you can't just be in silos. There should be some kind of integration across the boards to help facilitate easier and quicker and faster. And that's not really there. So I think that's my biggest frustration. And I want my businesses to open tomorrow, hopefully.
I just wanted to try to better understand the frustration. Is it really just that the boards could do a better job messaging what it is we do and what our responsibilities are, or is it more the crosswalk?
I think messaging I understand, but again, yeah, a lot of folks don't understand. Like, well, what do you mean? You're the Regional Water Quality Control Board. What do you mean you can't answer this question for me? I think not just information out there, but the boards within themselves should be more integrated. I know Tam was here. That's wonderful. But, who do I even pick up the phone and call and say, there's no water in Early Mart today. What do we do about that? And for me, that's the frustration.
If I could, I think, Serena Mccollumy, the undersecretary, came up to Reading not too long ago. I went up to, and we had a presentation to the Reading office that was part presentation, part kind of listening session about what the employee concerns are. And that really came up in terms of what she wanted to work on most of all is figuring that out across Cali, PA. And I think you're exactly right. The integration is lacking. We can do the best we can within our agency, but it's hard to know. I mean, it's sometimes embarrassing to know. You mentioned that you're on the air board, and somebody's like, well, we've got a significant odor issue. Who do we call to complain? And I'm trying to rack my brains. I'm like, I'm not sure which air district you're in. I'm not sure, which fish and wildlife district you're in. I'm gonna have to research that. Oh, hey, and in the course of researching the, who's doing what there, if you find like a major initiative that like hits the nail right on the head, and lo and behold, I don't have that at my fingertips to say, oh, you should call them because they're actually spending a lot of resource in that exact area right now. But I think that's well heard, and I just interrupt to say that that is something that is big time frustration, I think, across all the BDOs, and we're trying to bridge it at Cal EPA. I think that the next step is to bridge it across to other agencies like DWR and some of the counties too. And it came up for what it's worth in some of our discussion about the lack of communication between the state and the counties, lack of coordination there. It takes a lot of investment to do that because they all are their own special little entities, but you know, it's investment that does pay off. So I just comment. I tell you, that is like, you know, that is my kind of golden ideal out there. Anyhow, I'll hand it back to Mark.
I just wanted to comment. I mean, listening to what she said, I come from a different perspective. I mean, I was a city planner, so I know the whole gamut of resources of how to get information out. In fact, before I came onto the board, I would get calls like that. I mean, to call the county board of supervisors, who to contact with the division of drinking water and so forth and so on. So I guess in this little process of the frustration, but an opportunity would be for us to find a way to connect those two, the information that needs to. So as a new board member coming on board, you know, serving your communities and your constituents and the type of questions they would ask, a resource list of information that could be provided. So when you get those questions, you have some information of a point of reference to give information versus I got caught up. I mean, but that's really how it goes, and you know. So I was just sharing that. It makes a big difference because you're here at the top. You don't hear all the things down there, and I just happen to come from that area where I'm hearing it, and you got to have answers.
Okay, I guess I've already done this once for the committee anyway, but real quickly, I was approached about joining the board after a friend of a friend who was the appointment secretary at the time found out that I was having too much fun in retirement. And I do have a background in environmental consulting, mainly contaminated sites and tanks, and I'm familiar with NIPDs and WDRs and a few of the other programs that the board regulates. So I had enough background, and there was only a one-year term to fill in, so I thought I'd give it a roll. And really, I've enjoyed it a lot. It's been educational and stimulating, and I went and got myself reappointed, so I guess I'll be here for a little while. I don't know how that even happened. That's a black box. I guess in terms of frustrations, I was frustrated today about funding. I mean, I guess, you know, to hear a program that's going to evaporate because there's no funding, even though it's a successful and not very expensive program, I'm sure. That's frustrating. And yeah, I'm frustrated by some of the bureaucratic requirements, like filling out Form 700 and all kinds of take a driver's training again, stuff like that. But, you know, those are minor annoyances. And I guess the other, yeah, Estonia again, right? The other one, I'm kind of frustrated when I hear about programs that are somewhat struggling, especially the cannabis one comes to mind. And it isn't because of lack of ability or focus by the board at all. It's just the systemic problems with the law, and it's you know, very selective adaptation by various counties and cities. And I don't know what the solution is to that, but I can see it's kind of a dead end in terms of potential success until some of those root causes get fixed. But otherwise, I'm enjoying it, and look forward to more meetings.
Like Mark, my frustration, I'll start out with frustrations. My frustrations include cannabis and certainly the homeless program, but I have some hope that, particularly after the governor's State of the State speech, that maybe we can get some traction on the homeless issue. My long-term frustration has to do with, and this is in the policy area, our voice in the past has been the EO going to the management committee, talking to state board staff and high-level staff too. And our concerns have been well articulated, but they get lost. The state, it seems to me that what has in the past been showing up on state board agenda on any policy item doesn't have very much of the input from the regional boards, but is basically what some state board staff thinks important, and possibly there's a state board member influencing that from time to some degree. I think that's been addressed somewhat. I know the last 4 or 5 years, now that the chairs are meeting every month, conference call, typically, but in May we meet face-to-face, April or May we meet face-to-face, and we also have a whack at each other in October at the WQCC. That this has created a lot more input because we have either the chair or the vice chair from the state board there, and we get our input, and that's going to be happening on homelessness as an example. But we have on other programs, we spend a lot of time on the fire program. Clint's been there for some of the presentations. And other programs that the board's been putting in place. But I think we have to keep working at that because it gets back to what Denise was saying. Sometimes programs can't be, well, state board likes to have one program, period. Pretty simple, one size fits all. And one size does not fit all. Local circumstances, whether it be meteorological or geology or what have you, vary from site to site. Their problems on the coast aren't necessarily the kind of problems we have inland here, given the different climatological conditions and so forth, population densities, things of that nature. So there's a lot of reasons why you have to tailor programs to local conditions, and the state board programs have to have that flexibility, I feel. And that's difficult, very difficult, I realize. It's nice to sit in an ivory tower somewhere and write a program, but it don't fit. This isn't the first time we run into this. Way back in the 90s, there was a big push, a big effort. The chairs traveled the states, meeting in some of the various regions, not all of them, but trying to get stakeholder input, and we were going to put together this thing that was going to solve the problem. It didn't. I think maybe what's going on now is a better effort that may have a better chance at resolving itself. But that's a long explanation of what my major frustration has been, but it's been a frustration for longer than I care to admit. The regional boards, I was actually involved with the regional boards and with the state board before I came on the board. I was a professor getting grant money, doing work on various programs, and both Selenium, and then I got a phone call one day from the state board. They had a contractor walk off the job. He was supposed to be doing the West Bakersfield groundwater study, and I ended up putting together a team, and we finished that study up. Oh, that was for the state board. So I kind of was familiar with the organization. So when this regional board had a meeting about August of 1989, it was a meeting in Visalia. Major item on the agenda was the issue having to do with the selenium, and in particular the ponds that were then being operated in various areas. And there was an individual, I won't call him a gentleman, who came in front of the board, was chewing the board out, using 4-letter words. And I mean, the board members sat up there and they were so cool and so neat, you know. And when they got done, the chair said, thank you, sir, for your testimony. And the guy stomped out, and the board went on and did their business. I thought, boy, that's a neat board. And by January of the next year, well, December of that year, I was appointed to the board, and I've been around most of the time since then.
I'll just, I'll, in the interest of time, I'll sum up what was said at the Strategic Planning Committee. I will say that the just you'll probably hear more from Henry from Region 9. I think the efforts to kind of consolidate the board chairs and make a stand against some of the kind of onslaught of workload that's been coming from state board that disrupts our internal processes and has us running around things. That effort's probably kicking up again. I know just for what it's worth, my response to that has been kind of twofold. One is kind of, there is a process, and there is a process that is fairly laborious for statewide projects, and the state board is supposed to work on statewide projects. So when we have mid-level managers at the state board saying, regional board staff, I want you spending a ton of time doing this, drop everything and do this, our pushback is to give them the process and say, well, that's very nice. Please, you need an executive sponsor. You need to clear this at DMC. You need to work this through MCC, which is the consortium of EOs, get approval from Eileen or one of the chief deputy directors, and then we'll do it. And that usually shuts things down. The other, but it doesn't shut all of it down. And I think the other component is working with the folks at state board to try and consolidate all these requests, all these kind of little errands that they have our staff running around on that disrupts our internal workflow, and try and make sure that we have that at least cataloged so we can kind of talk about this in a better way. And thankfully we've got some folks at state board who used to work in Region 5, and so they kind of appreciate that impact, and they're starting those efforts underway. But I think you're going to hear more about it at the chairs meeting. There's a lot of momentum at the chairs because a lot of these efforts are felt throughout the state. And I will say, very, very plainly, it's all for good intentions. I do not see anybody kind of maliciously doing that. It's just a lot of good ideas are good ideas that we should address in a couple years once we're done addressing the good ideas that we're working on now, as opposed to let's do it all at once, which is kind of what the current status is and how the current vetting process goes. I'll summarize what we heard from the Strategic Planning Committee with respect to what brought staff to the board. I think there was quite a few refugees from the consulting world that decided to put their efforts in a different direction to kind of work for the common good. This is a phrase that came up a number of times, make a personal impact. Christine, I know you mentioned you had worked with the regional board before to understand kind of what we do, and frankly the regional board has a pretty good reputation, so we get a lot of folks coming in from state board and from other programs here to Rancho Cordova. So that was the common themes, including for myself, kind of the desire to serve the public and to do something a little more meaningful with what we do from our 9 to 5. Common themes for frustration, frankly, I think we mirrored a lot of what you said, the slow bureaucratic processes. For my own personal one was a lack of flexibility in rewarding high achievers. Within the state structure, there's a limited ability to kind of have your high achievers be kind of put up on a pedestal, or we can't give them a bonus. And I think the default position in the state and in many government agencies is, wow, you're really turning out a lot of high quality work product. Here's another 5 projects to work on because you're the rock star. And so it's to try and combat that, because that's something that's recipe for burnout, and to let them have time to work on special projects that they want to work on and things like that. And then inefficiencies, and I think Christine brought a very salient point, which we hear over and over again. There's a lack of admin staff. It's just the nature of our organization and how we clear things through finance. And I know this is being recorded, so I can't go into the details, but it is much easier, unfortunately, to get technical staff when there is a new program up and running than to get the admin staff to support that technical staff. And so that's something that we're working to try and combat, and working with Undersecretary Mccollumy to kind of have those conversations with the governor's office. With that, I will start the SWOT portion of today's event. And I think similar in format, I'd like to hear, particularly from Denise and Raji, also Mark and Carl, what you said in January. And we'll start off with, and then I'll briefly recap what the Strategic Planning Committee went over. And any one of you can raise your hand and say, well, you're forgetting something, if you see fit. We're all equals here, so I won't take it personally at all. I do want to say, of the ideas that came out during the strategic planning session, one of the concepts, Maxine, that you brought up really kind of stuck with me in particular. It's a concept of leadership at all levels. And I don't know where that catchphrase was formed, but it is something that I keep hearing about. Or is that, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So, hi, I'm not a former consultant. I came from the chemical industry, so from manufacturing, and this is a thing that was key to our organization, was having leadership at all levels, and it's a concept of continuous improvement, and it's a part of Lean Six Sigma, Six Sigma in general, and so that's where that came from, and it is, I think it's critical for success.
Yeah, and though I've been engaged in Lean Six Sigma, I think that phrase, when you said it, really stuck out. And it didn't fit neatly within any of the categories that we're talking about here, but it's something I wanted to kind of put in front of the board as something that I know I'm thinking about as we kind of move forward. With that, I'll keep going in the same order. Denise, strengths of the organization.
Okay, well, you said it a few moments ago, the reputation of the water board, along with the professionalism of the water board. Also, the ability to get things done. I mean, as I said when I first came on the board, I've never seen such professionalism where people took the task and were able to successfully complete it. It might not answer the questions that all the discharges want or the EJ groups, but the staff does an enormous job and dealing with the tasks at hand and trying to meet the timelines, responding to the communities, the stakeholders, and to the board. I think those to me are tremendous strengths to this organization.
I also think one of the major strengths that I see here is the stakeholder input, like all the working groups. I think that's so awesome. That was something I've never seen before, even being as a business owner and dealing with different state agencies, whether it's Caltrans or different county agencies. You just don't see that. Even on the air board, we never had, I mean, it was very adversarial in those days. I mean, I hope it's better now, but I love the stakeholder input. I love when the groups come together and they're able to talk about, what they discussed at their meetings. I think that's really important because that gives the water board transparency. I think that's really important. And I agree with Denise. I think that the folks that work here are very professional. I think they're very intelligent, educated, and they're very empathetic. I think they have empathy towards the folks that are coming in and helping them out. I think that's wonderful. Sometimes agencies are known to be very hard-nosed, and I don't see that here, which is exactly how it should be. So I think that's just, I can't say enough about that. And I was very impressed when I came here and I met everyone that worked here. And I'm not just saying that because you're all sitting here, but that was something I noticed, like, wow, okay, we really do have adults in the room. So I think that's really one of the greatest strengths, the people.
Yeah, I guess I would just echo that. Having been on the other side of the table as a consultant, working with guys here like Alex McDonald and Steve Rosenbaum, and even before that, Gordon Boggs, are some of the names that come to mind. But I always respected the regional board as an agency who would listen to my clients' concerns and address them fairly. And that wasn't the case across the board with other regulatory agencies or even with other clients like Caltrans, you mentioned. I mean, I worked for them, and it's like, okay, that's a whole different ballgame. But then in addition to all the strengths that are listed here already, I think one other strength is, in spite of, you know, the normal turnover that you'll get in any organization, there seems to be a real thread of institutional knowledge here that is remarkable to me. And of course, we have the king here of institutional knowledge, but and really, I think that flows down through the organization. And I know there's been some turnover in management, and that's typical, and in staff. But these programs live on, and they seem to have a fair amount of consistency as a result of that. So.
The leadership at every level, while it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to create the institutional memory, it might, given the fact that people take responsibility at every level. And as they move through the organization, that pays off. So there may be a tie-in there. One of the strengths that I see of this organization that didn't exist when I came on board, and I've always admired the technical competence of staff, the professionalism, but that's already been mentioned, but is a reorganization that took place several years back. And that's where, whereas in the past we had really 3 separate boards, and every office ran their own program, and this truly became a regional water board when individuals were given responsibility for the various programs that we have region-wide, and there was integration of work going on in the 3 offices. And I see that as a very important improvement that was made in this board. And Adam, I'll let you figure out how to write that down. But I think that has really added to the ability of this board to make better use of its resources. And that's become ever more critical given the new programs and typically very complex programs that we've been picking up over the years. When I first came on board, we basically were wastewater treatment plants, abandoned mines. Abandoned mines were big in those days. And we had a dairy program, but it had less than 1 PY. So it was a much different board than it is today. It's truly amazing what you guys handle, the very large number of very complex programs. But with that said, it's important to make use of the resources we have. And I think the integrated management structure, as Adam's put up there, has made it much more feasible to be able to manage the resources in those programs.
I appreciate the input. Again, without going through, I think you'll see the main strengths that we came up with when we were working through this with the strategic planning committee. I think a couple, and some of them are exactly what are echoed here. A couple of things I thought were pretty cool to see. Creativity as an attribute is something I think that we, as an organization, it's hard to nurture that, but when you do see it show up, that's something that you want to continue to nurture and take advantage of. I also think that an interesting kind of and kind of governmental philosophical point, and I think it was Rebecca Asami in the Fresno office, if I'm not mistaken, who brought up the fact that we're a board and that staff work for a board is actually a strength, as opposed to, say, working with a department where there's a department head that may be less accountable, that can issue orders without having public hearings. When you go in front of a discharger and you have a conversation about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, the backstop is always, well, we can have the board decide this, and they are responsive, and they will listen to you. But if you're kind of trying to strong arm us, there's no one director that you can call up and say, hey, I want this to go this way. It will be vetted publicly, and you're going to have a hard time kind of flexing your muscle and getting your way here at this organization than you might with some other organizations. I thought that was an interesting strength to bring forward, and I won't go through necessarily all the others, but they're in front of you.
There's one down here, the fifth bullet. It says board governed
That's it, yeah.
or board governs. Which should it be?
Board governed, that we're governed by a board.
You may want to change the ED to an ANCE.
Yeah, the one thing that I won't say is not here, but I'd like to bring out is the diversity of our board. I mean, I've gone to the WQCC board meetings, and our board is I'd say it's one of the most diverse. And to me, it's important because it's reflective of the many issues, the constituencies, and from the professionalism or backgrounds that we have, it plays a major role. And so from one end of the Central Valley to the other, there's representation, and it's important because the constituents I see out there, they see that, we hear them, and it's nothing that we take for granted.
I will say, and I won't call up the specific item, but as an executive officer and as somebody who's worked with other organizations too, sometimes on those critical issues, particularly when you're talking about an EJ issue, if you have an EJ presentation that's to a board of I'll say it, older white men and exclusively older white men, man, the tone is a lot different when there's a representation with women, people of color, and people with lots of different backgrounds and experiences. And I know I treasure that as your executive officer, that even that there's a breadth of experience and there's a breadth of backgrounds that bring to the table. It's a lot easier to defend a board's actions when it is reflective of the people that it regulates.
And that has been something that has occurred last 15 years or so. The changes has taken place. What we haven't been able to get rid of is the word old. Not that you're old, but board members, if you go to WQC as an example, tend to be older.
Yeah.
And the reason why is younger people can't afford to serve. They've got jobs to do and families to take care of, and that becomes a major issue.
Oh, yeah.
As it should be.
Yeah.
No, we've had comments from EJs we've had comments from EJs in the past noting the lack of diversity, and it's good that we've made the change.
So getting into it, the next up is weaknesses, and again, weaknesses from your perspective, from where you sit, attributes of our organization that are detrimental to achieving our strategic goals, and really this kind of is something that we can use to figure out what we can improve, even if you look around at what other organizations do better than us. And I know that that's something I'm constantly on the lookout when I see, Energy Commission, CPUC, Air Board, DTSC. I always kind of look at, well, what are they doing better than us, and how are they doing that? So again, the next prompt is for weaknesses.
Okay. Well, my comment is kind of what I've made mention of before, and it's dealing with administration. And I know the board, and not only the board, but, staff has to deal with implementing its programs. They get directions from the state to implement programs. But in coming up with different programs, we have administrative support that has to fit into that. And sometimes they can't keep up because the changes keep coming. So the decisions sometimes will have an impact on that administrative support. And, how we address that, and where you made mention of leadership from at all levels, I think that might be one way to look at that, because they are the ingredient that holds all the organization together. I mean, we have all the professionals, but if 5 secretaries protest and don't come to work today, what happens to the work? What happens to the backup? So to
Everybody
me,
goes home.
well, I'm just saying that the administrative support plays a vital role, and that recognition needs to be there for the work that they do.
I agree with that, and I'd suggest moving that second bullet up to number 1.
Yeah, so these aren't ordered.
Realize that, but people are going to read them, and they're going to start out with the first bullet.
Yeah, I will say that's that is just about number 1 on my list. I would add to that, and this is kind of far-reaching, and it is to make sure that there are promotional opportunities within the administrative classes too. And I think just again, not to wade into kind of how the alignment is. There is an abrupt ceiling if you do not want to go into management for some of our folks in the administrative classes. It is far easier to advance as a geologist, as an engineer, as a scientist, as an attorney than it is as an administrative class. Even if you're coming into this with a college degree, and even if you do your job exceptionally well, it hits a ceiling, and it has to do with how the classes are within our organization. I will say I've raised this issue and raised it repeatedly with state board management, and it is something that's getting traction. I think Eileen brings her experience in the federal workforce where you can go through government classifications even if you are even if you are in an administrator class, you can keep advancing. Whereas with the state, if you're say in an AGPA class and you top out, there's not really many good places to go within our organization. So we lose staff that way, and we lose highly talented staff that way. And I know I've brought it up before. I think it's the workforce development part of Cal HR took a look at the classes that are worst paid in the state compared to their private sector counterparts. The analyst classes were number 1, and that's the AGPAs. And so they're almost all concentrated in our administrative unit. I think that's kind of a glaring problem that water boards wide. I think that's something that we need to take on. But that's well received, and I will move it to number 1 because I think that's a big one in my book.
For weakness, I think I would go back to kind of the whole integration between what I talked about earlier, between the water boards, different divisions, kind of working in the silos. I think that's the biggest weakness, I would say. And also, like right now, listening to you talk about the different classes and how the staff here is, I don't really even know how any of that works. And I don't know if we should. But it's interesting because I'm wondering if any other boards ever have input on that or not, or if it's necessary or not. I don't know. Is that a weakness, or is it's actually better for us not to know? But that's quite interesting because maybe there's some insight and some information. I mean, as a business owner, that intrigues me on how you're promoting folks and not, because the same issues I deal with. So I just thought about that when you were talking. But I would say that's the biggest weakness I see is kind of the working in silos and the interagency non-communication.
Carl should have one, right? So we can talk offline about that. I think it is for the leadership team and for folks who are interested in leadership, it's one of the toughest issues that we wrestle with, and it never appears in front of the board. I think the big reason it doesn't is because it is highly charged from a union perspective. One of the I won't say an oddity, but one of the things that is very different with the state and federal government is federal governments, their union is almost per agency. So everybody from the janitors at US EPA to the scientists, they all participate in the same kind of bargaining structure. Within this organization, I think there's at least 4, maybe 5 different classifications that all have different union rules and different bargaining contracts with the state. And so whenever there's kind of an allocation of resources, when it goes to finance and we kind of vet the positions, it turns into a very, very kind of, it's very complicated. So the pay scales get very complicated. The equity issues get very complicated. Management's ability to wade into those issues is virtually zero. It's highly illegal for us to do that. So that's one of the complications that we kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's there's quite literally, there's different rules for breaks for engineers, for the administrative unit, for the geologists. It's very subtle, but there are actually differences there, and it's very. He's management. He's none of those rules apply to him. But yeah. So it's I can talk at length about that. But it is you're right to kind of say it's a tough aspect of the organization.
It's mind-boggling that there's 4 or 5 different unions. I did not know that. So you earn your salary, Patrick, and you managers. That's crazy. I had starred before anybody said anything, the lack of admin staff. I mean, I managed a lot of offices in my history, and yeah, without the admin staff, nothing happens. I mean, they're the cogs in the wheel and make everything move. And I think that might need to be number 1. The second one I had starred was the inability to shift resources to highest priority. If you can't do triage on your programs, it makes it difficult to kind of reward the ones that are performing properly and being productive, and the ones that are kind of status quo or not being productive. So we've talked about that earlier, so I won't go on. The other one I added was it's a current weakness, and I hope it won't be a long-term weakness, but we have 2 vacancies on the board, and it presents challenges in terms of having a quorum. I know we made it this time.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll make it next time, but if we have decisions that have to be voted on and we don't have a quorum, obviously we're not going to be an effective board. So I know Christy's working on this, and hopefully there are some irons in the fire that'll bear some fruit. But it's been a while already. I think 4 months now. So hopefully we'll get those filled.
There's one on here. It says the challenge in ensuring consistency. It gets all 3 offices. I already spoke to that in the fact that we now have a integrated management structure. So I guess I would say the challenge of continuing to improve the integrated management structure, because I think that's the way to go personally. Would be maybe a better way to approach that. I share Mark's frustration over the inability to shift resources, but recognize that's like trying to shoot a rocket to Mars, Might be possible, but it's in the distant future, way distant future, because of the fact those funds come down with line numbers, and to go from one line number to another line number is get it. It takes an act of Congress. Actually, sometimes that's what it does take. So, but I guess we have some funds which are not a lot, but some funds that that are discretionary, and so maybe, am I corrected on that? Basically, the general funds. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think the part of the frustration there is that the 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 requirement that you work under your duty statement has been even more ramped up recently. It used to be the case, and used to in relatively recent history, about 10 years ago, where it'd be relatively easy for, say, somebody in the dairy unit to easily flex and say, okay, well, irrigated lands needs a little bit more resources this quarter. Let's have them work on a bunch of special projects in irrigated lands, or work in mines or NPDS. And I think that for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is because some of the funding streams are different, it's really hard to do that. I think that there's some ability, and frankly, we're kind of strategizing about how to figure out how we can get kind of see if we can get some type of a tech senior position that can be a jack of all trades to do that type of work. But in terms of flexing line staff from one program to the other, it's really frustrating. And I think, you know, Clinton sees some of the most of it, and because I think the cannabis resources are because they're so in flux as time goes by. Sometimes it's really tough to kind of reallocate those resources to where the need is. There's just such a long lag that it can be frustrating, because you got you know, when you look around the office and you're like, there's capable people that can do this job, and what they're doing is a lower priority, and can't we just move it around? The answer is, well, you can, but it'll take a lot of effort to do that. So,
What did you do during the fires? You had an emergency on your hands, and you must have moved staff out of their assigned jobs into addressing some of the fire issues. Am I correct?
We were able to make some minor modifications, but still operating within a certain, call them pay codes. The other thing to keep in mind too is that because we're a fee-based organization, the State Water Board considers fees every year. Really having a certain set or number of staff charging to certain fee codes, that all plays up into how much fee is charged to particular dischargers, depending on, you know, if it's dairy situation or if it's an NPDS situation, threat and complexity. All of those numbers are balanced to try to figure out what that fee schedule is going to look like each year. So if we're moving staff consistently back and forth, some dischargers, permittees may be charged, say, more money than they're actually reaping in terms of staff resources to work in that program. So there are a number of considerations that we have to take into account, but some of those accounts are a little bit more flexible. Some of them are pretty rigid.
I will say it's you know, one of the benefits when you guys promoted me, one of the benefits that the small benefit, but it's meaningful, is as an attorney, you actually have to charge for each separate program that you work with on a per hour basis. So it's not as bad as the private sector, where you have like 15-minute increments and you got to figure out what account to charge from. But you do wind up knowing about 20 different codes for all the individual programs. So if I'm working with the WDR program, it's one code. If I switch over and do a little bit, review a letter for the UST program, it's a different code. A site cleanup, it's a specific cost recovery code. So you do have to keep track of that. Thankfully, in management, there's one code, you know, because it's kind of comes out of the core funding for the CEA position.
Always wondered what made you come over.
I tell you, the old Lord Joaquin used to have us. We had, if we were late or got that stuff wrong, we had to bring in snacks for the whole organization. So you know that was something everybody was furiously doing. But it is tough. I mean, those funding codes do come with strings attached, and we'll continue to explore ways to flex that around. But it's tough, and I think that you'll see the with respect to weaknesses, they're pretty much in line with what you guys were discussing. And so with that, I'll move right into opportunities. And let's go in opposite direction this time. So I'll kick it off to Carl.
I like it the way ADA compliance was made into an opportunity.
That was wild. Was it Jonathan that did that? I think. Oh, you did. Yeah. Okay. Chris did that. And that is a wonderful exercise in positive framing, which I think is I think they just came out with a survey that says that is, if you look at all the keys to like a better life and diet, exercise, it's quit smoking and positive framing is kind of like the two things that that'll help you get by. And I think this is a good one because it certainly had me looking at it from a different perspective. So.
But I think that, and this comes out of what we're talking about today, and I don't know quite how to word this, but to rethink how we better award staff for their efforts and keeping not only keeping on top of our programs, but taking our programs maybe to heights that we had never imagined. So I think that we have to address that issue. And I see that as an opportunity.
The only one I don't know if it's an opportunity or a threat, but the governor now seems to have his finger on the pulse of a lot of things that affect the water board. And he's sort of a windsock. You know, one day it's water sustainability, and I guess yesterday it was the homelessness issue, both of which are critical, obviously. But I see the priorities of the board seem to shift pretty rapidly based on where the governor is putting his emphasis. You just sent a note that I guess the chair meeting has already got an hour and a half devoted to homelessness directly as a result, I'm sure, of the state of the state. So I don't know. I think he's clearly got his eye on higher office. I don't know how long Newsom will be around, but I think he could be viewed as an opportunity or a threat depending on what he's going to emphasize in his next speech. So just an observation. I guess the other opportunity, and Carl has brought this up in the past, is research. ARB, other organizations have research divisions, and I don't know that that would occur at the regional board level, but even at the state board level, it seems to be an opportunity that nobody's taken advantage of yet.
If I might add, I think it should be under weakness, the lack of a research capability. The Air Board certainly has that capability, and it has helped them in furthering certain parts of their mission. And as just to give an example, right now on the CV Salts program, we're looking at a real issue in that we don't have a good hand on some of the technology that's needed to do the salts part of that program. And the same would be true with the nutrient side, the nitrate, although it's a matter of funding that there. I won't go into that. But we need a research capability. And while I'm at it, I'll do my bit on the opportunities. I agree with Mark. We need a research. I think there's opportunities for us certainly in water resilience, of developing new paradigms for ensuring water quality. That's a big, broad, undefined topic, but one I think it could be put a little bit more down on water resilience. and the inter and the and the innovation opportunities it introduces. Very good.
Well, going back to the research, I mean, just random question. Do we at all partner with any of the state colleges or the UCs for engineer students and geologists, kind of pipelining them? We do? Okay.
The answer is yes. I think the state board is working together. The hard part, and I think twofold. One, increased outreach, so we're showing up at the job fairs and things like that, and particularly the focus has been on minority organizations. So, but all job fairs in all areas of the state, we're showing up in greater force, and I think that's been emphasis of the of Eileen's recently. I think the other thing that they're getting off the ground is an internship program for engineers and for scientists and things like that. That's something that had been dormant for a while, but they're working on restarting that. I see Carl.
Well, okay.
No.
Boy, she's hardcore. The what I'm getting at, go back to a few years ago when it turned out that Volkswagen was not their diesel fueled cars were really putting out a lot of emissions, and somebody within the organization knew it had developed technology that turned off the sensors when they were put under testing protocol. That was picked up by the California Air Resources Board. And granted, part of it was through contracts with others, but they got their own laboratories. And they have staff on board who understand those kinds of technical issues. And we have staff that are capable of that, but they don't work in that on a day-to-day basis. I say I'm talking about the whole water board system. And I think we have to develop our own internal research capability. We don't have the dollars for it either, whereas the Air Board does.
Yeah.
So if we have our own research capability, we have some lab competence, maybe some additional dollars with it that do go out to academia or wherever else would be proper for it to go, then I think that can make a strong program. But we don't have that, and I think that's a weakness.
Well, okay, thanks for the mic back, but I'm just kidding. But I think that'd be amazing to be able to have. And why don't we have the money that ARB does? Does anybody want to enlighten me on that one?
Oh,
little bit?
it's a greenhouse gas fund.
Okay, so we have to
so
find
there's
somebody to
separately appropriated pots of money that the Air Board gets that we are strictly a fee based, whereas they also operate with carbon fund based money, and they operate with a share of general fund monies due to certain revenue streams that they have that we don't have. Our organization, it is. I mean, when you talk about like taxpayers, well, it's not really taxpayers directly, even though they buy the goods and services and they pay the rates, but it really is the permits that completely fund this organization.
Well, then maybe that's an opportunity as well, is to find different ways to tag on to get that money. I mean, that's a big opportunity, whether we put folks into looking into that or finding a different pot of money or something creative, especially since the governor, during his, with the whole point was water for everyone, that was his, maybe now's the time.
Well, I will say in a very, I say it's a little odd, but the whole Safe and Affordable Fund, that is actually Greenhouse Fund 2. So that is a very, in some quarters, highly controversial move to fund the billions in that program through greenhouse gas funds. There's a lot of people very angry about that, including some environmental organizations that have been working for greenhouse gas reductions that the state says, well, it's the right thing to do, and but it's an interesting use, and I think that was the legislature's big last creative kind of use of funds. But there's other ones out there. I mean, I think that when we were debating CV salts, the nitrate users were proposing putting forth a nitrate tax on themselves to pay for drinking water solutions. So ideas like that are still on the table in terms of figuring out what we're going to do next.
And just on that same track, does anybody at our, whether it's the board or yourself, do you work with legislators to tell them we need this? Can we?
Yeah.
Do we have that ongoing communication? Is that just?
The short answer is no. And the reason is this governor and prior, going back a number of administrations, they say we are the people. I am the person that negotiates with the legislature, not my agencies. And so every kind of legislative contact that we have goes through our legislative office. That is vetted through the governor's office before we take an opinion or advocacy role for anything. So that's it's their prerogative. We're still, at the end of the day, we are an executive agency, and I like you guys to keep your jobs. So that's one of the areas in which legislative advocacy, whereas a lot of other entities do it, we do not. We run that all through our legislative affairs office. We make proposals every once in a while, but if it's not a proposal that the governor wants to hear, it never makes it to legislators' ears.
There was a proposal made this last year by one of the state board members. There was a proposal made this last year by one of the state board members to establish a research division. Apparently died. It never made it to the legislature, that's for sure. I don't know where it died.
Yep. Good questions. Yeah. Opportunities.
Opportunities. I would say the community engagement process, as we're dealing with right now with the CV Salts project, would be an opportunity, as it was when CV Salts came around and we moved it to this process. To add community engagement to this piece would be another pivotal part for the board to do this process and set the stage for how things can really happen. So, I mean, eyes were upon the board and the region for coming up with CV Salts. Now we have another leg to add to that, and I'm sure we'll be successful at it, but it's an integral part of where we need to go. The other opportunity I would say would be going back to admin support. I'm looking at a couple of words: mentoring, training, and retreats. I'll start with retreats first. I don't have the science background that everybody else has, but I'm a planner, and I worked in city government for many years, and I worked with administrative support for many years. And I'll just share one example. We always have retreats for management. We always have retreats and all of the other different agencies. We get together and meet and come up with goals and objectives and things that we're going to work on. But in one of those management meetings I mentioned, what about our support staff? Mm-hmm. And they came together and said, well, we should do that. We did a retreat for the admin staff, and it was an overwhelming experience. People cried, all kind of, because their feelings had been locked up. Nobody heard from them. All they got was, we have a new project, we have a new mandate, we need you to do it. So I know we don't have money. We're talking about money, but we don't have to have money. We could take a day, put the support staff in a room with a lunch, and just find out what it is, because as we're doing our strategic plan, they're an integral part of it. We know the geologists and all the other people, but they're an integral part of it. They have to be able to help manage that workload. And the training. I see often in the reports, and I'm sure the support staff goes through trainings, but as we're going through this exercise, make sure that everything that everybody else is getting, that we have the administrative support and full view, because they will bear the brunt if we don't.
Yep. Absolutely agreed. Absolutely agreed. Christine, let's note that. Before we go into the last part of threats, I think one of the ones that stood out to me as something that was a little special was as an opportunity, the current awareness of climate and focus on water issues. I think that kind of stood out. We've got youth movements. Certainly there was a movement coalescing around the climate change and students for climate change are combating climate change, but very, very, very engaged and aware a youth movement that we have that is kind of forcing this front and center in a lot of the dialogues. We had, and there are extremes. We have the Sunshine Movement showing up at the California State Capitol fairly regularly, and the interactions that they've had with Dianne Feinstein about Valley issues and things of that nature. But it's in the public's awareness in a different way, and I think that's something that, as an organization, we can, if we can capture, harness that energy, I think largely through community engagement, I think that makes us a much stronger organization. So I was glad that was called out. And so lastly, save the best for last, threats. And again, threats is external to our organization, something that we have to prepare ourselves to that could buffet, what we do and something to be prepared for. So again, we'll start with Carl on this one.
I really can't add much to this other than an underinformed public should be in cap letters. I think that's pretty well. External threats leading to underfunding certainly could be another one.
Yeah, I guess the one that stand out to me, I think Clint brought this up in our January call, was the population and climate change impacts on water availability and use. I mean, it's something I don't know that we can directly impact, but that's a huge issue in the long term. I don't know if it's an external threat, but it seems that turnover is a constant threat that you have to deal with, and it's somewhat tied to the economy. So maybe it is somewhat external, but turnover and recruiting are probably an ongoing threat that you guys have to wrestle with. And then we've already talked about it, but the other threat to me is that you are fee-based. I don't think that's going to change either, but it's external, but it does limit your ability to shift resources, and I don't know that there's any solution to it. It seems like if a line item came with a 10% contingency that you could use at your discretion and move money around at a limited basis, even that would be a huge improvement. But otherwise, it looked like a good list to me.
Well, I would say the federal government. No, in all seriousness, I think it really affects the ability for the water board to be effective, and I think it affects staff, and I think there's a lot of issues surrounding how do you even address that with your team, and just a lot of uncertainty around it. And I think that's a big concern right now, especially for anything related to the environment.
I was being very politic. I said external underfunding. Thank you for being much more explicit.
Well, we just had President Trump in Bakersfield yesterday, so.
Underfunding and put it under federal government and uncertainty. I think that was really my intent.
Just feeling a little bold today, Dr. Longley.
No, I was going to comment on the same thing. You say what you say. I mean, and mine was in the area of funding. I mean, if funding is pulled from any of EPA, it has a significant impact on a lot of what we do. So that was my
I have one more threat. We don't have enough brooms to sweep the forest.
I'm not even going to give you the microphone for that.
Rakes.
We don't need Jonathan.
All right. Well, I thank you so much. I think, as I mentioned before, we're going to consolidate this and try and use some of these points as a touchstone as we work forward with the strategic planning process. Really, again, we're in the assessment phase, so I think the input that you provided today was really good and really solid to kind of see where we were as an organization. I think it, to me, I also I find it gratifying that your perspective is to a large extent mirrored by the staff. I mean, it's very similar type of perspectives, whether you're talking about opportunities with public engagement, whether you're talking about external threats. I mean, I'd be more concerned if there was a large dissonance between what the board was saying and what the staff is saying. So I think we're at a pretty healthy level there. Last component, and it's just something I just want to talk about quite briefly in terms of, and I think it's just page 6 of your little package there. Stakeholder engagement options. There's a lot of different techniques that are out there for stakeholder engagement. I want to kind of see some of your input here as to what you are thinking when we're doing stakeholder input. My kind of perspective on this is that what you can do, what will be very meaningful is if we come up with essentially a questionnaire that is done on an interview one-on-one basis. I think I've found personally that's where you get the most candid interviews, and you have to go to where the people are, whether it means going to Stockton and meeting with the Restore the Delta people there, or going to the communities themselves. We can come up with a list of folks who we can actually go out and talk to on a one-on-one basis to hear their input, come up with a standard questionnaire, and then cap it all off with a forum in August that we can hear from folks who may want to voice their concerns more publicly to the board itself. But I think that's, that is kind of the strategy that I was envisioning, that we could engage with the stakeholders. I think, based on some of your input here today, it won't be the last word that you'll have. We'll be meeting internally and kind of coming up with a stakeholder engagement plan that we'll bring in front of you in June, and that you can kind of have additional input on, say this looks like it's going to work, looks like it's not going to work. If we have a questionnaire, we'll present it to you at that time. So that's kind of just what I want to tee off the discussion with, see if you have any input as to ideas about how we can engage, recognizing that in the Strategic Planning Committee, it's 7 folks. We also have the regular jobs, but we are going to devote the resources to make sure that this gets done right. And then myself as well, I'll be doing some of that engagement efforts too.
So the workshop that would be in August, it would just be the one workshop that we would be perhaps doing. Will it be here or?
Here in Rancho Cordova.
Okay, all right.
During the first half of August? I believe so. I think the board meeting date is set, so it would be with the board meeting date. Yeah, it'd be. Again, if you have additional feedback, if something bubbles to the top of your mind, don't hesitate to reach out, and we can see if we can accommodate that. But I just wanted to get you thinking about that. That's probably what's going to be in the outreach plan that we bring to you, and it's probably going to be in June. All right, and with that, that's the strategic planning component for today. Thanks so much for your participation. Good stuff.
Let's go back to our seats and do agenda item 14.
And thanks again to the strategic planning folks who.
Thank you. Great input.
And of course, thanks to Gene and Brett, who are running around with microphones and arranging tables.
Three.
So, back in session, agenda item 14, election of the chair and vice chair. At this time, we move to the election of chair and vice chair for the Central Valley Regional Board. And we'll go through this with a discussion, nominations, a vote, and that ends our day today. So, I guess I'll start it out. At the last, this time last year, we had a discussion. I was elected a chair for this last year. Carmen was the vice chair, and Carmen was to move up. As it turns out that Carmen was not at this meeting. She didn't send in anything. Patrick had talked to her about submitting something in writing. That wasn't done, and she won't be here for the April meeting. That I think poses, in my mind, poses a bit of an issue. Although I did tell Carmen that if the board wanted her to be chair, that I would be happy to nominate her. So that's really your call as members of the board. I don't know if there's any more input.
Yeah, go ahead.
You go ahead, Patrick. I was going to ask if she had interest in.
Yeah, so just to be completely candid, I exchanged emails with her on February 17th, where she continued to express her interest as serving as chair, but regretted that she couldn't make the February and April board meeting. I invited her to provide a candidate statement in response to that email, saying that it can be anything that you choose to write up, and we can read it into the record. I have not heard back from her since then.
So I asked for discussion.
I guess, well, this is all a little off kilter because we only have 4 board members here, and even if Carmen were here, we'd only have 5. But not having Carmen here makes this kind of a difficult discussion, I think. I know Carl has served this board admirably for, I won't say how how long, but it's been, excuse me, it's been a while. And he was ready to move on, I think. Excuse me. A strawberry in my throat. And I haven't talked to Carmen. I'm not sure what her current obligations are and what her real desires are. So I really don't know where to go with this. I've talked to Carl off the record and just kind of batted ideas around, and if he is willing to stay another year, I mean, I think the board would benefit from that. But at the same time, it feels like he's done his time, and if he wants to stay on the board and be a mentor to whoever moves up, that would be wonderful as well. So I don't know, I don't know if there's an opportunity to postpone this discussion.
Unfortunately,
No.
it is a legal requirement that the board choose a chair at its first regularly scheduled board meeting. So that has to be done. Vice chair there's actually no legal requirement for vice chair. So if you want to postpone the discussion of vice chair till the next board meeting, we could theoretically do that. But a chair has to be chosen today.
Dr. Longley, are you interested in serving another year?
Well, I would serve another year, and I think that's it at this point, because the following year is my final year, and I don't know. I'm willing to serve another term, but I cannot tell you what the governor's office is going to do, having looked at what's happened to some other long serving board members in other regions. In this region, for that matter. I don't know why Bob's not on the board.
Mark, would you entertain the idea of serving as chair?
I have given that thought, and I feel like I'm pretty green, honestly, to step into that role. If Carl wanted to step down this year, I told him I'd be willing to do it, and I would do it on a limited commitment. I've been actively retired. I enjoy being actively retired. I might only be active for another year or two. I don't know, but the time commitment just to participate on the board is very doable. I know Carl has made a career out of water and engineering, and he devotes a lot more time to the chair position than I think most of us realize, including me. And I don't think I'd be able to fill those big shoes, to be honest. So it's an option, but I think, you know, it's kind of up to Carl, honestly. I'd like to support whatever Carl decides to do. I would say I'd be a candidate to be vice chair if the board decided to go that direction, not knowing what Carmen's up to.
Well, I would serve another year. CV salts is still ongoing. It will be for another 100 years. Sorry, I won't be here.
I think that's the right way to go. It's, you know, again, I think about Dr. Longley. I mean, he should have been the #1 strength on that SWOT analysis, you know, how he shepherded this. Yeah, come on, again.
It's true.
He shepherded this board all these years. And I don't know if we wait on the vice, that way Carvin has some input. I mean, if legally we can hold off on that. I mean, I feel bad just axing her and she's not here.
My suggestion would be, I mean, if you want to tee it up, and Jessica can correct me if I'm wrong, but if it appears that there's general consensus for the chair, so I'd tee that up with a motion in a second, and we can vote on that, and then we can have a motion and then discussion about postponing the discussion for vice chair.
Okay, I move that Dr. Longley be nominated for chair for 2021.
I second that.
And real quick, it is just for 2020.
Yeah, they said
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, they
our fiscal years are a little on, but
they said there was going to be a problem with this 2020 this year because of that exact thing. So it's 2020-2021.
No, I obviously support that, and I'm here in Sacramento, and if there's anything I can do to help cover some of the other activities you're engaged in outside of the board meetings, I'd be happy to do that.
And for the record, I did talk to Denise. I've twisted Denise's arm so much it must be sore, but I asked her if she wanted to be board chair, and your answer was? No. Okay. So I thank you very much. We do have to vote. Roll call. Yeah.
Ms. Kadara?
Yes.
Ms. Brar? Yes. Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Should I abstain? Yes.
Okay. Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's go to the vice chair. Carmen won't be back until the June board meeting, and we're about halfway through the year at that point. So I would suggest that we go ahead and come up with a vice chair. And in fact, I would like to have I'd like to invite the vice chair to the May 22nd meeting of the regional board chair. Some vice chairs come, and I think it would be a good education. It's downtown. It's here in Sacramento. Unfortunately, I can't take you to San Diego or someplace like that, but that I think would help a lot. Hearing what goes on there and meeting some of the other regions. And full disclosure, should have made the disclosure when Patrick mentioned Henry from Region 9. I got a phone call from Henry at Region 9 the other day, and he's very active. He's pushing this leadership issue and so forth, and the workload issue. Interesting thing, this is his last year, but he's being replaced by Celeste Cantu. And for those of you who don't know Celeste, she's a former executive director of the state board, now on a regional board and going to be a regional board chair. She certainly knows the organization, and I think that she'll be an asset as we address those issues. So we're going to have, I think, an exciting time this next year as we move some of these issues forward. And I would like to see a vice chair on board from the very beginning.
I'll move that Mark Bradford be nominated as vice chair.
I have to say that I just would like to hear from Carmen. I know she's not here, but she has been on this board longer than the both of us. And she is the vice chair currently. And I'm not comfortable without knowing if she's interested or not. And I'm not sure why she didn't respond on the email, or I don't know either, but that would be my only concern.
Yeah, and I would echo that. It feels a little awkward, obviously. And I'm happy to do what I can without having a title or anything as vice chair to support Carl here in Sacramento. But I don't know if you can reach out to her again, Patrick, and see if you can get some clarity on her desires.
Yeah, I absolutely will. I absolutely will. And so there is a motion on the table for Mark Bradford. You know, motions don't need to be seconded, but it can be seconded to be voted on, whether it wants to get voted on up or down. So since there's a motion on the floor, and again, Jessica can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry if I put on the attorney hat too often here. But that's what we're hearing right now.
But I think what we can do is we're going to have to continue this item until the April board meeting. And
I think we would need a vote today on the open motion.
or
Well,
we can ask the motion be withdrawn.
Exactly, that's the other option.
I'll withdraw the motion.
So it is also, again, because the vice chair is kind of, I won't say made up, but there's not a formal designation of vice chair. If the board saw fit, it could select an interim vice chair until the June board meeting, or it could just postpone it until the June board meeting. It's or
April board meeting.
okay. Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
We need dialogue with her before then, and she needs to express an opinion one way or the other.
All right, sounds good.
Because typically, we would have the vice chair on for the pre-agenda meeting and all of that for April, so there's a role to be played.
That is absolutely what I was going to say. In the event that Carl could not be present at the April board meeting and we needed pre-hearing rulings or things of that effect, which I believe there could be an enforcement item or two, for my purposes, and perhaps that's selfish purposes, but to do the board's business leading up to April in case Carl wasn't available, or in case, in the event that a matter came up before the board where he was conflicted out for whatever the reason, say there's a big spill at Fresno State, which I don't think there would be.
I'm
but
not so sure about that.
that engineering lab.
Yeah.
So I would strongly suggest that there be somebody that the board would pick to fulfill that role, even in the interim, even if it is Carmen for the time being, and then that be revisited, because there are decisions that would come up that we would need a vice chair or somebody fulfilling that role for in the lead up to the April board meeting. But again, if not, we'll figure out how to get by, and we could table any of those issues until the next board meeting if that's what comes up.
Well, in the past, what they have done when the chair has been not able to serve and there was not a vice chair, they went to the senior board member. And that could be a precedent. That's how I ended up chairing the December.
I remember that one.
Oh, God, it went to a 10:45 or something.
So Denise, that's you.
What's your pleasure as far as? Pardon?
Is it Carmen? Yeah, Carmen's before me. Okay.
But if she's not able to make it.
If she's not going to be there for April though.
Oh, well. Well, tough job, somebody's got to do it. Hey, I'm a board member, if I have to serve, I have to serve. But I'll be going kicking and screaming.
All right.
Well, if I'm not able to serve, you're the most senior board member then.
Yeah, if nobody else is there, yeah.
We can agree to that? Yes, we can agree to that. Yeah, I think they're, yeah.
I just had a thread up here. Okay. And you will be on the phone for the April meeting?
Yeah, however the arrangement needs
Right.
to go.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
So we will consider that the default position, and I don't believe that needs a vote in that event.
Sounds good. And with that, we will close this item, and we will adjourn until the April board meeting to be held in Bakersfield.
In Bakersfield.
You
The
know, and I
dates?
told my wife the April meeting is in Fresno. It's always in Fresno. I'm going to be home in the evening. I'm sorry.
And you're gonna be chair again.
I'm not going home.
All right. Well, thanks so much.